I should have had my little notes out, right?
Okay, so today my report is on causes of police corruption and how to stop it. The abstract for my paper is the topic of this research paper is to make the reader aware of what is considered police corruption. Stopping, preventing, or deterring police corruption can be a touchy subject. This paper will examine the issues surrounding police corruption and the importance of why police corruption should be stopped. This paper will explore why some police officers fall into deviant behaviors and corrupt activities. The reader will be able to know the different terminology that is used in police corruption. The research will talk about the effects of police corruption on how in law enforcement and it affects the community. The paper explains how police corruption can occur in any law enforcement department and where there is no guided structure. Some citizens are in fear of reporting any forms of corruption by law enforcement that they know of. Some officers follow the blue code of silence and turn a blind eye to other law enforcement officers that they know are participating in corrupt behavior. Any corruption within law enforcement should be stopped immediately, and any officers involved in corruption should be held accountable for their actions. Society holds law enforcement to a much higher standard. So today I have two of my co-workers. I have Brandon. Say hi, Brandon. And then I have Anthony. So guys, give me your perception of law enforcement and corruption that you know of and why you think it should be stopped.
So, do I have to get in the
Brandon?
camera? Okay. So, I have, firsthand knowledge of law enforcement. I work with law enforcement pretty much hand in hand, but I also have the opposite of dealing with bad officers. So, in my opinion, I think, especially in the communities I grew up in, if you start out with bad officers, it kind of forms I would say, a negative image of the officers, and it kind of spreads, especially along my community. And it's always that push and pull between, them being able to do their jobs and then the kind of hate that they get. I've seen, especially on the internet, stuff like the George Floyd, the Rodney King, stuff like that. It really, you look at it and you look like those people, and you see, especially when it comes to the people coming to justice, that they don't. They sometimes get off, they get light punishment, they get death duty. It sometimes forms a stain on the community, and most of the times in that scenario, we don't ask for extra punishment, but law enforcement officers are just like airplane pilots. You can't afford to have a bad apple. You can't afford to have somebody that doesn't know how to do their job.
So when you think about bad apple, I actually have that in my paper, where some departments feel as though that one bad apple can actually deter or steer a lot more officers into corruption. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's true. I think if you have one bad apple, especially if it's their lieutenant or somebody that's higher up, then they're more liable to take certain procedures that they can't take or that they shouldn't take. And if they do take it, it gets covered up, and it forms bad habits. It lets them get away with things that they're not supposed to, things that if they do, such as planting drugs that you've seen on the internet and how long that goes. And I've seen cases to where officer had 20 plus cases where they're planting drugs and all other officers are into it, and they fear retaliation if they speak up. So if you could have one bad apple, it kind of ruins, one bad apple ruins the batch. So that's the way I look at it.
I'll say, what are your thoughts on should the U.S. justice system treat law enforcement officers differently who are charged with corruption?
I think so. I think it's definitely you can't be corrupted. If you're an employee and you steal, you can't just go to another job and just it's going to show up on your record. I think that once you get charged with corruption, not only should you get a harsher penalty because you're ruining somebody else's life, you should never be involved in law enforcement for the rest of your life. You should have that stain on you, so you cannot get another job opportunity. You can't transfer another county and do it. You can't do it. You should have nothing else to do with law enforcement for the rest of your life.
Okay. Another question. Should law enforcement officers receive special treatment for crimes committed?
When you say special treatment for crimes committed, what do you mean?
Say, for instance, we're going to go with the George Foreman cases.
The George Floyd case?
The George Floyd cases, where the officers were saw on video strangling the victim, per se, and then they tried to cover up a lot of the incidents.
So I'm pretty versed in that and the anatomy, and when they had the coroner fake the thing, and they had to get an independent doctor to go back and say no, it was asphyxiation. So I think in cases like that, it should be harsher penalties. So if it's 20 years, I think it should be 30 to 40 years, because especially if I strangle you, right, somebody's gonna come up and stop me. If a police officer's strangling him, you know, what am I gonna do? Even if I go up to stop, I'm gonna get in trouble too. So so that power that you have, you know, you also have to take that punishment if you do the wrong thing at the same time.
So what does corruption mean to you in law enforcement?
Corruption means you're not doing the right thing when nobody's looking at you, or when somebody's looking at you, right? Corruption is when you have the power and you abuse that power in the way that you know that you're not supposed to.
Great. Now, with a lot of corruption in law enforcement, do you know why some officers commit corruption or get involved in corrupt activities?
I think they get tempted. You know, you have power, you have access to things that other people don't have. Sometimes you have ego trips. Sometimes it's monetary. All different sorts of reasons.
You're touching very close on what my research paper is. Actually, I put in my research where a lot of times it has to do with monetary, where a lot of officers, they have low pair wages, which I've noticed also where, like in our position, what we do here at our job, we get paid more sometimes than regular law enforcement when they're the ones who are actually putting their lives on the line. So what do you think about different laws that should be put into effect in order to protect those who tell on officers, whistleblowers who tell on officers who decide to use the blue code of silence?
I think it should be sort of like Walmart has in the no retaliation, that there cannot be, if you're found to retaliate on an officer who does go out of his way or to do the right thing, I think if there's the retaliation, you get done, you lose your pension. I think it should be that harsh. That's the only way to stop it, especially with the history that it has right now. If you want to go as far as to stop it, you have to nip it at the bud.
What do you think about officers now with so much technology that's out there where everything is being recorded? Everyone pulls out their phone, record things, dating back to the Rodney King incident, where if it wasn't for the fact of someone being able to see exactly what was going on and present it to the news, these officers had already corrupted themselves by trying to sweep it on the rug and say they did not beat this man. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think it's good. I think, you know, a lot of the times the black community, they say things back to my dad, my grandfather, and even me have gone through things with the police officers, and you tell people and they're just like, you know, sometimes they feel sorry for you, sometimes they don't believe you, and they just sweep it under the rug. But if you have the video incident of it, if you have documentation of it, I've seen videos to where, you know, black guys running through a cemetery, scared of the officer shoots him in the back. I've seen officers shoot the guy when the guy had his hands up in the air, and the guy in the helicopter is saying, hey man, this guy looks like a threat, and he just gets eliminated. That's stuff that doesn't come out. Even the George Floyd stuff, the Rodney King stuff, you know, if that thing happens, there's no cameras, the officer says, hey, this happened, none of it, you know, we don't know it, we're none the wiser. So I think, you know, technology is a great part in holding people accountable.
How do you think that police corruption affects the local communities?
Especially around here where I grew up, it's distrust. You know, I try to tell people that a lot of the police officers are really good guys. You know, I know a lot of really good police officers, but it takes one or two bad interactions to where it kind of spreads, and everybody goes, well, I don't trust the police officer, they don't have my best interest in heart, you know, and it spreads down from when my grandfather was growing up in sundown towns and police officers telling him this and that, and then he tells my dad, and I come from here, and then he tells me. So then when I start growing up, I don't trust police officers, whether it's right or wrong. But you know, that interaction that I've had with the bad police officers sometimes can taint, you know, even I get nervous. I don't do nothing wrong, you know, but if I see a police officer now, I still have that in me where I get a little bit nervous to say, you know, I might look like somebody, or the actions that I've had with the police officers kind of form how I act with them now.
With us working alongside law enforcement, how does that make you feel sometimes when we see a lot of the law enforcement coming here to our building with our job and stuff, and we see them interact with us, but we also see how they interact with the shoplifters as well?
Mm-hmm.
To me, it's kind of good to be able to see it from our perspective, because we can see the good in the officers. Because we see a lot of officers that come in here and, you know, do you guys really want to prosecute, even though we still have company policy to follow?
Mm-hmm.
How does it make you feel when you see officers coming here and you see that they're human too, and they feel as though, you know what, this person made a mistake, maybe I can give them a chance?
Well, it's not good for obviously the person that shoplifted, but I would say it's probably my favorite part of the day. Meeting some of the guys, asking how the day was going, what they're doing, what they're up to. Because those guys, I truly believe, I've met some officers who I didn't believe it, but most of those guys, 90%, I believe, are truly good guys. And, you know, when they go into that mode of, hey, buddy, how you doing? Hey, you all right? You good? You good? You got my number? Call me. You need anything? To, hey, you shoplifted, blah, 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 don't do this and that. I've even seen them have talks, you know, to try to get people's life together. I've seen them get rough when they have to because of how people act, and it lets me know that sometimes that the person that they're dealing with dictates how they act. And it lets, you know, I can go and tell people, hey, you know, they're not bad guys, you know, how you act dictates how they act, and sometimes we can do better on that end, but it helps me, you know, form better relationships.
How do you feel though about the rapport that many citizens have with law enforcement, say in this community per se?
In this community, I don't think it's that bad. I don't think it's as bad as like maybe Orlando side. I don't have too many interactions with those cops, but I think the police officers here especially treat people with respect. They don't, you know, abuse their power. They don't disrespect you unless you get disrespectful first. So for the most part, I would say, you know, obviously you have the outliers, but for the most part, I would say that our community and our relationship with the officers in this community, especially with the shop with the cop, all the different events they have, the sheriff comes out, plays with the kids, talks to people, they'll stand outside and they'll talk with different people. I think it's pretty good.
Why do you think it's important that we stop and deter as much corruption as possible with law enforcement?
To build trust within communities first and foremost. I mean, you know, with the amount of stuff that's going on these days, and it's not as bad as it was back in the 2000s, but you know, pretty much all you see, you go on YouTube and you see different police officers doing different things. Even when the riots and stuff was happening in New York, you see a lot of police officers doing what they're not supposed to, shooting pellet guns in people's faces, knocking over old men, and you know, you feel bad for that. But on the other hand, that's a part of corruption, and that's the part of law enforcement that needs to be eliminated. At all times, while working in Walmart, I have to remain professional. Even if somebody's cursing at me, if I catch somebody shoplifting, if I've had a bad day and I come into work, I have to remain professional. So if I have to remain professional, they who have more power than I do, who have, you know, the ability to put hands on people, to impact their lives, have to stay even more professional. At no point should some of the things that I've seen be happening. And if we don't hold them accountable, if they're not held accountable, if we don't have a separate judge of their actions, it's always going to be the way it is.
With me knowing you as a professional and knowing that you're leaning towards going into law enforcement soon, how do you think that you can make a difference within the community as being a law enforcement officer?
Just talking to people. I'm a great people person. I think a lot of the times if you're you know, courteous and you're nice with people and you have good day in and day out interactions with people, I think it spreads, especially if you put years in the community and they get to know you, especially in the areas where you're always patrolling, or even if you're stopping and you're helping with things that aren't necessarily crime related. I think a lot of that goes a long way. Whether you're shopping, whether you're you know, just scrolling through the neighborhood playing basketball with the kids, a lot of the times they see that, they get your name out, and you know, they start to form a positive image in the police officers. And I hope that I'm capable of that. Sorry.
Great. Well, thank you, and everything that you pretty much touched on is pretty much like some of the information I put in my research paper. And do you have any questions for me about my research paper, about what I've learned, discovered?
So towards the beginning of it, what made you feel like you wanted to go into corruption of the police officers?
My first interaction was wanting to get in touch with, I wanted to get in touch with law enforcement officers themselves and speak to them, which hopefully I get the chance to tomorrow. But I wanted to just bring awareness about the corruption, but not so much as the awareness, but why it needs to be stopped, and let it be known that not all officers are bad, and that it's okay to trust law enforcement, and that once the community sees the officers in a different light other than what the negative that they see in the media, that they'll feel more comfortable being able to interact with officers and have them come into the communities without feeling threatened every time they get pulled over and stuff. Because me personally, I've gotten, pulled over a couple times, where I even got pulled over once where I was accused of driving a stolen car. And it was from a rental company because they were repairing my car, and I heard over the walkie where they were doing the description of the car and the description of the suspect. Totally different race, totally different car, and I had guns pulled on me, and I was terrified. I was really terrified. And I have actually been working in the law enforcement field as a reserve officer from Ohio, and I've also been in asset protection loss prevention field for over 30 years. So I've had many encounters with different scopes of law enforcement, as well as I've also been able to help work with cases with the FBI. So me being able to bring, bring awareness to people to know that there's things that can be done by working with the community as well. We can get that bond and trust built back among citizens and law enforcement.
Gotcha. And then so working asset protection for as long as you work, how do you feel that has elevated or shaped your view of law enforcement so far?
I honestly think it shaped my view a lot more because before I got into asset protection, everything was black and white, where people thought more or less that criminals were a certain race, certain gender. But after being in this field for over 37 years, I've come to learn, even with working with law enforcement, that the types of crimes that we see, it has no color. Anyone is capable of committing a crime. I mean, I've gotten, my first shoplifter was probably 5 years old, and I've gotten him like 5 or 6 times. My oldest was 78 years old. So it doesn't matter, it's just how you present yourself, how you work with the people, how you work with law enforcement. And I've been able to build an awesome rapport with law enforcement every area that I've worked in different states and different cities, to the point that they know me by my nickname Comet. So they know if Comet's there, that Comet's going to do the job, and Comet's going to be as professional as possible. And they know that they trust me as much as I am able to trust them. So it's been a very good experience so far.
So one last question, right? I have my ideas of, stopping corruption, which is like higher pay, separate judicial system, reviewing officers' actions. So what would be your idea to kind of combat the corruption that we see these days?
My idea would be, first of all, of course, to make adequate pay for law enforcement, because they are putting their lives on the line, but also to make sure that they have the correct resources for officers that are in need, as well as officers that are need counseling. There's some officers that feel as though that they can't go to their superiors for fear of being, labeled blackballed and stuff in law enforcement, or being retaliated against. And I don't think it's right. I feel as though if they had the right laws in place to protect them, then more officers would be willing to step forward as well, which would make it a lot easier. And then also, if the media, if there was a cap put on the media where the media wasn't allowed to put so much negativity out there to make people pass judgment on law enforcement, if there was a way that media could be screened before they put stuff out there, and that way people can go off their own judgment instead of what's being forced to them through the media, it would make it a lot easier for law
Yep,
enforcement.
I agree. I agree. That's all from me.
Thank you. Well, thank you, and that is my last question with you. Push pause and then we'll